In the autumn of 1221, 30,000 Mongol riders descended into a narrow valley in the mountains of Afghanistan, convinced they would crush the last remnants of a dying empire. They had conquered half the world. They had burned Samarkand. They had drowned Bukhara in ashes. No army had managed to stop them. No wall had withstood their battering rams. No king had survived their fury. But in that rocky valley called Parwan, something awaited them that they had never faced before. It was not fear, it was not surrender, it was a fugitive prince who had sworn to avenge his father, and 60,000 men willing to die for that promise. And then the valley awakened. Arrows fell like black rain from the hills, horses collapsed among the rocks, the screams of the Mongols mingled with the roar of the wind. Steel clashed against steel. The invincible cavalry became a mass trapped between stones and death. And in the center of the chaos, a man rode toward the heart of the enemy formation, his sword gleaming like lightning, his voice resonating above the thunder of battle. When the dust finally settled, more than 15,000 Mongols lay motionless. Upon the Afghan earth, the standards of the world's most feared empire had fallen into the mud. And for the first time in his life, Genghis Khan received news of a defeat. The echo of that day would traverse the centuries like a warning carved in stone, that even empires that make the earth tremble can bleed. To understand what happened at Parwan, one must go back barely 2 years, when the known world burned beneath the hooves of the Mongol horde. In 1219, Genghis Khan had crossed the mountains of Central Asia with an army of between 75,000 and 200,000 warriors, the most devastating military force the world had seen since the legions of Rome. His target was the Khwarazmian Empire, a vast domain stretching from the Caspian Sea to the borders of India, ruled by Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad II. The conflict had begun with blood. A Mongol caravan was massacred in the border city of Otrar. When Genghis Khan sent ambassadors demanding justice, the Shah executed them. It was the last mistake of his life. What followed was not a war, it was annihilation. Bukhara fell in February of 1220. Its inhabitants were herded outside the walls like cattle, while the Mongols sacked every mosque, every palace, every home. Samarkand, the jewel of the empire, resisted barely 5 days before opening its gates. Merv was reduced to ashes. Nishapur was wiped from the map. Persian chroniclers wrote that the Mongols piled the heads of the dead in pyramids so tall they cast shadows over the ruins. Shah Muhammad fled westward, pursued relentlessly by generals Jebe and Subutai. He crossed deserts, traversed mountains, sought refuge in every corner of his destroyed empire. Finally, sick, abandoned and desperate, he died on a desolate island in the Caspian Sea in December of 1220. His last words were for his eldest son, Jalal al-Din, whom he named heir to a throne that no longer existed. But Jalal al-Din was not like his father. Where Muhammad had hesitated, Jalal al-Din attacked. Where the Shah had dispersed his forces in useless garrisons, the prince concentrated them to strike with precision. Muslim chroniclers described him as a man endowed with great heroism, valor, and high talents. The Persians compared him to Rostam, the legendary warrior of the Shahnameh. He was young, barely 22 years old, but his eyes burned with a determination that made even the most hardened men tremble. After his father's death, Jalal al-Din tried to take control of Gurganj, the ancient Khwarazmian capital. But his grandmother, the powerful Turkan Khatun, had supported his half-brother as heir. The Turkish generals distrusted him. The army was fragmented. Instead of fighting for a throne surrounded by conspirators, Jalal al-Din did something no one expected. He abandoned the capital and rode south toward the mountains of Afghanistan, toward the land his father had granted him years before as a governorship. In Ghazni, the ancient capital of the Ghurid sultans, Jalal al-Din began gathering the survivors. Refugees arrived from Samarkand, bearing fresh scars. Kungli Turkish warriors came who had escaped the massacres. Afghan tribesmen from the Kalaj and Guri peoples joined him, mountain men who knew every pass, every cave, every hidden trail. His father-in-law, Amin Malik, brought troops from the Ghazni region. General Timur Malik, one of the few commanders who had managed to resist the Mongols at Khojend, arrived with his veterans. They were men of different languages, different tribes, different loyalties, but they all shared something deeper than blood: hatred for the invaders who had destroyed their homes. By the summer of 1221, Jalal al-Din had assembled an army of approximately 60,000 soldiers. It was not comparable to the hordes that had once defended Samarkand. Many of them were poorly equipped, armed with whatever they had been able to salvage from the ruins, but they were united by something the Mongols could not understand. Desperation had transformed into fury, and fury into determination. Meanwhile, Genghis Khan was busy in the north, subduing the last pockets of resistance in Khorasan. When his scouts informed him that a Khwarazmian army was forming in Afghanistan, the great Khan was not overly concerned. He sent his adopted son, Shigi Qutugu, with 30,000 soldiers to crush it. Shigi Qutugu was an extraordinary man. A Tatar orphan found in a raided camp when he was barely a child, he had been adopted by Genghis Khan and Berte, raised alongside the conqueror's legitimate sons. He was one of the first Mongols to learn to read and write, and he became the supreme judge of the empire, responsible for codifying Mongol law. He was intelligent, loyal, and experienced, but he had never faced an enemy like Jalal al-Din. The encounter prior to the Great Battle occurred near Walian, where the Mongols were besieging a fortress. Jalal al-Din attacked with his newly formed army and defeated them in open combat, causing nearly 1,000 casualties. It was a minor victory, but its echo resonated throughout Central Asia. For the first time, someone had demonstrated that the Mongols could bleed. Genghis Khan received the news with unease. He ordered Shigi Qutugu to pursue Jalal al-Din and destroy him once and for all. The Mongol general marched south with his 30,000 riders, convinced that victory would be swift. The Khwarazmians were refugees, he thought, survivors of a dead empire. They could not withstand the onslaught of the cavalry that had conquered half the world. Jalal al-Din awaited him at Parwan. The valley of Parwan stretched between rocky hills north of Kabul, a narrow passage where the mountains seemed to lean over the traveler like sleeping giants. It was a place where streams ran icy from the snow-capped peaks, where the wind howled among the stones, where the land itself seemed hostile to any intruder. For a cavalry army accustomed to the open plains of Mongolia, it was a perfect trap. Jalal al-Din knew every inch of that terrain. He had studied the passes, measured the distances, calculated where the Mongol cavalry would lose its advantage. He deployed his army in a defensive formation that exploited every feature of the terrain. The Afghans, mountain men who had grown up among those rocks, occupied the highest positions. The Kungli Turks formed the center. He himself positioned himself at the heart of the formation with his personal guard, 700 men willing to die for their sultan. The Mongols arrived in mid-September. From the hills, Shigi Qutugu observed the enemy army deployed in the valley. They were more numerous than he expected, perhaps double his forces, but confidence did not abandon him. His men had crushed larger armies at Samarkand, at Merv, at Nishapur. Numerical superiority meant nothing against Mongol discipline. The first day of battle began at dawn. The Mongol archers rode forward in their traditional harassing maneuvers, firing waves of arrows while spinning their horses in perfect circles. It was a tactic that had terrified countless enemies, that had broken infantry formations from China to Persia. But in the narrow valley, their movements became clumsy. The rocks hindered their maneuvers. The horses stumbled on the irregular terrain. The arrows that normally fell at deadly angles were lost among the stones. Jalal al-Din did not take the bait. He ordered his men to maintain formation, to endure the harassment without breaking ranks. Shields rose. Archers responded from elevated positions, and when the Mongols tried to charge directly, they encountered a wall of spears that would not yield. The battle stretched on for hours. The Mongols attacked, withdrew, attacked again. But every time they tried to break the Khwarazmian line, the terrain betrayed them. Their horses, bred for the infinite steppes, struggled to maintain balance among the rocks. Their formations, designed for flanking maneuvers, compressed in the narrow space until they lost all coordination. As night fell, neither side had achieved a decisive advantage. The Mongols withdrew to their camps, confident that the next day would bring victory. Shigi Qutugu studied the terrain by torchlight, searching for a weakness to exploit. He found none. The second day dawned cold and grey. Fog crept along the valley floor like an army of ghosts. Jalal al-Din had spent the night preparing something the Mongols did not expect. He would not be content to defend. He would attack. The battle began as on the previous day, with archer skirmishes and limited charges. But toward midday, when the sun had burned away the fog and the Mongols were focused on their umpteenth attempt to break the line, Jalal al-Din gave the order. War drums thundered through the valley. Trumpets sounded a long, grave tone. And then, like an avalanche of steel, the Khwarazmian army charged. Jalal al-Din rode at the front. His armor gleamed in the sun. His sword traced arcs of light. Around him, his 700 personal guards formed a wedge of death that plunged into the center of the Mongol formation. Behind them, thousands of Turkish and Afghan horsemen launched forward with a roar that made the mountains tremble. The impact was devastating. The Mongols, trapped in the narrow terrain, could not maneuver to absorb the charge. Their lines bent, fragmented, broke. Horses crashed into horses, men fell beneath the hooves. The perfect order that was the hallmark of Mongol cavalry disintegrated in seconds. Jalal al-Din fought like a demon. Chroniclers wrote that his sword never stopped, that his enemies fell around him like leaves in a storm. At one point in the battle, he came face to face with a Mongol commander. The man raised his bow, but before he could fire, the Sultan's sword struck him from his horse. He was the embodiment of Rostam, the Persians said. He was the vengeance of a dead empire made flesh. Panic seized the Mongols. For the first time in decades, the invincible warriors of the steppes tasted fear. Some tried to flee, but the valley had become a trap. Others fought to the end, but were overwhelmed and surrounded. Mongol standards fell one after another, trampled in the bloodied mud. Shigi Qutugu fought to restore order. He screamed. Commands tried to regroup his men, but the chaos was total. An arrow grazed his arm. A spear thrust nearly knocked him from his horse. Surrounded by disaster, he finally understood that the battle was lost. With a handful of guards, he managed to fight his way north, narrowly escaping the massacre consuming his army. When the sun set over Parwan, more than 15,000 Mongols lay dead in the valley. Thousands more had been captured. The Khwarazmians, maddened by years of suffering, executed the prisoners with a brutality that matched their enemies. Chroniclers wrote that they drove stakes into their ears, a symbolic vengeance for all the cities the Mongols had destroyed, for all the families they had massacred, for all the pain they had sown from the steppes to the sea. The invincible army had been crushed. The legend of Mongol invulnerability had been shattered. News of Parwan spread across Central Asia like fire on dry steppe. In Merv, the inhabitants who had survived the Mongol massacre rose in rebellion. In Herat, the Mongol garrison was expelled. In Bukhara, rumors of conspiracies were heard. For the first time since the Mongols had crossed the mountains, hope was reborn. In the hearts of the conquered, Jalal al-Din became a symbol. Poets wrote verses in his honor. Preachers mentioned his name in the mosques. He was the champion of Islam, the avenger of the dead, the man who had proven that the demons of the steppes could be defeated. But the victory carried within it the seed of destruction. The night after the battle, while soldiers celebrated around the campfires, a dispute erupted. A white Mongol horse, a magnificent animal captured during the battle, became the object of a fight between Amin Malik, the Sultan's father-in-law and commander of the right wing, and Saif al-Din Igrak, the leader of the Afghan contingents. Words became insults. Insults became violence. Amin Malik struck Igrak with a whip. Jalal al-Din was called to resolve the dispute. The Sultan, exhausted from battle, made the fatal mistake of favoring his father-in-law. Igrak, publicly humiliated, withdrew to his camp. That night, while the campfires still burned, the Afghans disappeared in silence. 30,000 men, nearly half the victorious army, abandoned Jalal al-Din over a horse and an insult. When dawn broke, the Sultan discovered the disaster. His army had been halved. He no longer had the dead forces to defend the ground he had won, much less to advance northward. With a heavy heart, he ordered the retreat to Ghazni. Meanwhile, news of Parwan had reached Genghis Khan. The great Khan was besieging the fortress of Bamiyan when a messenger brought him the account of the defeat. Chroniclers wrote that he listened in silence, his face turned to stone. He showed no anger, he showed no pain, but those who knew him understood that behind that mask was concealed an icy fury that knew no forgiveness. During the siege of Bamiyan, a poisoned arrow killed Mutugen, Genghis, Khan's favorite grandson, son of Chagatai. The great Khan ordered that the city be erased from the earth. Neither men, nor women, nor children, nor animals were spared. Bamiyan became the city of sorrow, a place where grass would not grow again for generations. And then Genghis Khan marched south. Personally, with 50,000 of his best warriors, he had come to avenge his dead. He had come to destroy the man who had dared to defy him. Jalal al-Din knew he could not resist. With his army reduced to 30,000 men, he tried to reunite the deserting Afghans. He sent messengers to Igrak begging for his return. He offered riches, titles, forgiveness, but the wounded pride of the Afghan leader was stronger than any promise. The messengers returned empty-handed. Without options, Jalal al-Din made a desperate decision. He would abandon Afghanistan and seek refuge in India, beyond the Indus River, where the Mongols could not reach him. He gathered his men, his families, his treasures, and began the long march eastward. But Genghis Khan was faster. His scouts tracked the Sultan's every movement. His riders cut off every escape route. The great Khan did not rest, did not stop, did not forgive. He pursued Jalal al-Din like a wolf pursues a wounded deer. The final confrontation occurred on the banks of the Indus River in November of 1221. Jalal al-Din had arrived too late to cross. His barges were not ready. His army was exhausted, and behind him the horizon darkened with the Khan's standards. The Battle of the Indus was a slaughter. Genghis Khan deployed his army in a crescent shape, pushing the Khwarazmians against the river. There was no escape, there was no surrender, only death. Jalal al-Din fought as he had fought at Parwan, with a ferocity bordering on madness. He charged again and again against the Mongol lines, seeking to open a breach that never came. Around him, his men fell like grass beneath the scythe. His generals died. His guards were massacred. All was lost. Then he did something no one expected. Mounted on his horse, he threw himself toward the river. The Indus ran swollen, furious, fed by the mountain rains. Any sensible man would have drowned. But Jalal al-Din spurred his horse and leaped. Mongol archers ran to the bank, drawing their bows, aiming at the man disappearing among the waves. But before they could fire, a voice stopped them. It was Genghis Khan. The great Khan had ridden to the water's edge to see the man who had defied him. He watched in silence as Jalal al-Din struggled against the current, as his horse swam desperately, as the waves swept him downstream. And when the Sultan finally reached the opposite shore, soaked but alive with his sword still in hand, Genghis Khan spoke words the chroniclers would never forget. A father who has such a son is truly fortunate. Then he turned to his own sons, who accompanied him on the bank, and added something none of them would forget. This is how a son should be. Jalal al-Din had lost his army. He had lost his family. He had lost his empire. But he had escaped, and as long as he lived, the flame of resistance would not be completely extinguished. The following years took him throughout Western Asia. He rebuilt armies and lost them. He conquered cities and abandoned them. He fought against Mongols, Seljuk Turks, Georgians, and Ayyubids. He was hero and villain, liberator and plunderer. His life became an endless odyssey of wars and of flights. Finally, in August of 1231, cornered by the Mongols in the mountains of Kurdistan, Jalal al-Din Mingburnu was murdered by local bandits. He was barely 32 years old. He died alone, far from his homeland, without crown or army, the last sultan of an empire that no longer existed, but his legacy endured. The Battle of Parwan became a legend that traversed the centuries. In the bazaars of Persia, in the mountains of Afghanistan, in the mosques of Central Asia, people remembered the day when a fugitive prince had humiliated the world's most feared conqueror. It was proof that no empire was invincible. It was a reminder that determination could overcome brute force. It was the hope that even in the darkest moments, someone could rise against tyranny. For the Mongols, Parwan was a wound that never fully healed. Shigi Qutugu survived the defeat and continued serving the empire for decades, but the stain of that day accompanied him until his death. Genghis Khan avenged the loss with a brutality that exceeded even his usual standards, but he could not erase the fact that he had been defeated for the first time by a man with half his resources. In a lost valley in the Afghan mountains, historians would debate for centuries the meaning of that battle. Some argued it was a victory without consequences, a temporary delay in the inevitable march of the Mongol Empire. Others saw in it proof that geography and willpower could overcome military superiority. All agreed on one thing. Parwan was the moment the world learned that even giants can fall. Today, the valley of Parwan still lies there, among the mountains of Afghanistan. The wind still howls among the rocks, the streams still run icy from the peaks, and if one listens carefully, the elders say, one can still hear the echo of that battle, the clash of steel, the cry of warriors, the voice of a prince who refused to surrender. Because some victories are not measured by territories conquered or thrones won. They are measured by the flame they ignite in the hearts of those who remember them, and the flame of Parwan, 8 centuries later, still burns. In the dust of that valley, where 30,000 Mongols met their end, a truth was written that transcends time, that history is not always written by the victors. Sometimes it is written by those who dare to fight when all seems lost, those who find victory in resistance itself, those who prove with blood and steel that the human spirit is stronger than any empire. Jalal al-Din Mingburnu never recovered his throne. But in that valley of Parwan, during 2 days of September in 1221, he proved something the world would never forget, that even empires that make the earth tremble can be defeated by men who refuse to kneel.